On this episode of Doing the Most, we are making Jack Keller's recipe for blueberry wine.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from meat to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
This video is part of our series on the late Jack Keller's wines from his book, Home Winemaking. And big shout out to our friends at Homebrew Ohio. This video series is sponsored in part by Homebrew Ohio, who provided some of the gear and equipment to make this series possible. Thanks to Homebrew Ohio for believing in this series. This is one of many videos we're doing on Jack's recipes. You can find all the rest of those videos in the playlist on our channel, Jack Keller Wines. And we are trying to cover the gamut from fruits to vegetables to roots and flowers, just kind of anything that Jack could make into a wine, he made into a wine, and we're trying to kind of explore the breadth of what that looks like. But in this episode, we're doing blueberry wine. Fairly simple and a really wonderful fruit to ferment. If you've watched this channel kind of at all, you probably know that I love to ferment blueberries. So I'm interested to see how Jack's blueberry wine stacks up when I mentally compare it to the many blueberry ferments that I have done in my time fermenting over the last 12 years. Some notes to remember about Jack's wines. Typically, they start out at a gallon or more volume, but don't end up a gallon when you get to secondary. So you want to either plan to brew 20 to 30% more than the recipe calls for, or have a smaller vessel like a 3/4 gallon vessel to rack into, so that way you're minimizing headspace in secondary. Additionally, we're trying all of Jack's wines dry. That means no back sweetening. So we're getting a blank slate tasting for Jack's wines. A lot of these we can tell would be improved by some back sweetening, but that's not the point of this exercise. Our point is to ferment it, taste it, and talk about what we might do differently from the very baseline recipe. So speaking of recipes, let's take a look at the ingredients for Jack Keller's blueberry wine. The ingredients for this blueberry wine are 4 pounds of blueberries, 1 12-ounce can of 100% grape juice concentrate, 1 pound 8 ounces of granulated sugar, 1 teaspoon of pectic enzyme, 1 teaspoon of yeast nutrient, a half teaspoon of yeast energizer, 1 gram of Fermaid K, and Lalvin's RC212 yeast. All right, so you can see it's a fairly simple recipe. In the book, Jack talks some about pH buffering to kind of nail a specific pH range for acidity for this. We're not going to do any of that because it's not super beginner friendly. But if you want to dive more in depth on pH adjustment, you should get a copy of Jack's book, Home Winemaking. You can pick up a copy of that from the link in our description. That link benefits the channel and get you a great deal on Jack's Home Winemaking book. So now you know what's in it. You've got all the caveats about it. Let's take a look at how it's made. Like many of Jack Keller's recipes, this one begins with heating up some water. This is 1 quart of water, and we're just going to bring that up to a simmer. Meanwhile, we'll get our equipment sanitized. And we're going to put our blueberries into a brewing bag. This is going to help contain the pulp and the seeds and the skins a little bit, while also giving us plenty of osmotic action so that the yeast can get in there and consume those sugars and pull out those flavors and colors without us having too much trouble getting the fruit out on the other side. Get that bag cinched up. You want it nice and tight so that way your fruit can't escape. And then we're going to mash the berries. Now this bag has been sanitized, so it is drenched in sanitizer. I squeezed as much of that sanitizer out as I could. Don't worry about some of that no-rinse solution getting into your wine. That's why it's a no-rinse sanitizing solution. That's why I love Star San so much. All right, our sugar goes into our hot water, and we're going to get that dissolved. Then our yeast nutrient and half of our yeast energizer go in. We'll save the other half of that yeast energizer for later. And we're just going to get that stirred to combine and then immediately dump that into our bucket on top of those cold blueberries. This should bring everything rapidly down to around room temperature. while allowing everything to mix throughout. And then we're gonna mash those berries one more time. That way we can just make sure that everything is really thoroughly combined. All right, then in goes our can of grape juice concentrate. This is gonna add a little bit of wininess to this fruit wine, as well as give it some big color and a little boost in the acid department. Then our pectic enzyme goes in. We add this at this point because we don't want to add the pectic enzyme when anything is too hot, because it will denature the enzyme and thus make it useless. So we add it here once everything has cooled down, and it'll go to work breaking down those fruit solids. Our yeast is RC212, one of my favorite red wine yeast. Does a really great job for color extraction as well as preservation, and helps bring out some big tannins. Give it a quick stir, stir, stir. And then we'll sanitize our lid. And always make sure to write on the outside of your bucket what it is you just put in your bucket. And we'll add an airlock with some sanitizing solution in that and let it ride. Now every day you're going to want to open that up and press the berries. That way you make sure that the fruit solids stay below the liquid line. You don't want anything drying out and having the potential to mold. And also this helps kind of keep things flowing through that bag so you can get increased extraction rate on that and speed up your fermentation time just a little bit. So our lid goes back on, and like I said, every day or so, you'll want to open that up and press those berries. Then once that gets close to 1.060 range, we're going to open that up and take the fruit out. So I am doing this by using 2 sanitized bowls, pulling the fruit bag out, placing it in the larger bowl, and then I'm pressing it with the smaller bowl to press any of that remaining wine out of the bag. So just press and gently pour back in. Mixing a little bit of oxygen in is not going to be a problem here because the yeast can use it during fermentation, since there's still plenty more fermentation to go here. And then our Fermaid K and the remainder of our yeast energizer go in, and we'll let fermentation complete. Once that's done, it gets transferred off into secondary, and we'll cold crash that so it can clear up quickly. And then a few weeks later, we get that into bottles. We've seen how it's made. Now let's find out how it tastes. Really excellent color on that. Kind of a red purple. Kind of a Merlot or a Burgundy kind of shade. Not super light, but also not so dark as to come off as opaque. It smells like blueberries on the nose. It's a bit hot still, which is interesting because this is well over a year old at this point. But I can smell just a little bit of ethanol heat kind of riding on the top. It's a little leggy, doesn't have too much cling on the glass. Fresh blueberry smell. Kind of some mixed berry aromas in there too. A little tart cherry, kind of dry fruit kind of smell. It's winey, but like, it's clear that it's like a Welch's wine. It's got that table grape kind of wine smell, not a complex grape. All right, bottoms up. It's exceedingly dry. Not a lot of fruit flavor retained. It does have that table grape wininess, that red grape wine, kind of neutral red grape flavor. Little bit of berry kind of on the exhale. Not a lot of berry up front. I think I want more acidity, but I want like a rounder acid, like a malic acid. I would be curious how this would do subbing in a can of apple juice concentrate instead of that can of grape juice concentrate to give it a rounder acid profile. It drinks a bit sharp the way it is. It's kind of jabs you in the front of the tongue, like needles in the front of your tongue. I love the aroma much more than I love the flavor. The flavor isn't off-putting, but it's also not my favorite thing either. I have made what I believe are much better blueberry ferments, and the end screen of this video will have links to those videos. Overall, a fun part of the experiment, but not one of my favorites of Jack's that I've made. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll check out more episodes on our channel, as well as obviously that playlist of Jack Keller wine videos. And I hope you'll hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so that way you can keep coming back when we have fresh content. Until next time, happy brewing and cheers.